Thank you, everybody, for coming to today's session on direct mailing for Newsrooms. This is one of the many sessions that we offer through the Linfest Institute's News Philanthropy Network. I'm excited that we have so many people here. There's there's about 70 people right now. I'm really happy to introduce our presenter today, Sean O'Riordan. Sean is a membership manager with Spotlight PA, which is a nonprofit newsroom dedicated to investigative and public service journalism in Pennsylvania. As someone who is in development, I'm super excited to have Sean here. He shared his presentation with me earlier this week, and even though I've been doing direct mail for 15 years, I feel like I learned a ton. So I hope that everyone here today will come away with some great ideas for their next mailing. If you have any questions, you can add them in the chat, but we'll also have some Q&A time at the end. And just so you know, we will be sharing Sean's presentation in a follow-up email after this session. So thank you all again for coming. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sean.
Great. Thank you very much for the introduction to that. I'm very happy to be here as well. So everyone, we have a really great turnout for this. That I'll get to my presentation. So, as Jeff just said, my name is Sean O'Riordan. I'm the membership manager at Spotlight, Pennsylvania. I've been at Spotlight for just under a year or so. Previously, I worked at the Pennsylvania SPCA, where I oversaw the direct mail program for almost 4 years. And when I started at Spotlight PA, we had a pretty basic postcard mailing system going on. It wasn't any kind of advanced direct mail program. So one of the reasons that I was brought on was to transform that into a more strategic program, a bit more targeted, that used a bit more data driven. One way I was doing that was at the Pennsylvania SPCA. I was mailing 13 pieces per year. About 10 were sent to in-house lists, which were currently already existing donors. Usually about 30,000 people or so that had given in any previous 3 years. And I also oversaw acquisition pieces. The acquisition pieces were essentially pitches to people who were not already familiar with our work, using mailing lists that we rented from outside organizations across the spectrum. Other animal rights organizations, to veterans groups, to anyone that seemed like they might be interested in our work. I'm sure anybody here who has worked on direct mail has had to answer this question: why direct mail? Most of us are going to be from digital outlets, and so we are going to lean towards digital marketing. Direct mail tends to seem outdated, especially because many people just tend to ignore their mail in general. But there are still some pretty significant advantages to direct mail that may not be immediately apparent. For one, it's no spam filter. When you send something to somebody's house, it's ending up in the mailbox, and at some point, somebody in that household is going to physically hold that piece. Whether they read it is up in the air, but they're going to see it. They're going to see your logo. They might open it, and they might get your pitch. It's very effective for that exact reason. The response rates are significantly higher, 50 times higher specifically. There's been some extensive studies on this. For the exact, there is no spam filter. People are seeing them. They are more likely to open it if they just have something in their hands, as opposed to something that's easily ignorable like email, especially when you're getting 50 emails a day. These pieces are also likely going to be held onto for a long period of time, especially for something like a digital news outlet. The SPCA was kind of an easier pitch for something to get an immediate response. You put a picture of a sad puppy with a story about it, and people want to respond on the spot. Mail pieces are going to be held onto. People are going to want to read your news for a long period of time, and they're going to continuously see that piece as long as they don't throw it out.
Hey, Sean, sorry to interrupt. A few people in the comments were saying that they're having a little trouble hearing. Would you be able to speak up a little bit or get closer to the microphone?
Sorry
Thanks.
about
Sorry
that.
to interrupt.
Is that better? Cool. Another important factor is that the philanthropic population of the US is still skews very old. I believe the average donor age is about 64 years old. There's a very specific reason why that is very relevant, and that is the wealth distribution in the United States. Between Gen X and older, over 90% of the wealth in the United States is still owned by people Gen X and older. These are people who grew up very familiar with the mail. They're very comfortable going through the mail. They're less, although many of them are very digitally savvy nowadays, they're not going to reject it out of hand in a way that, say, a millennial or Gen Z would. And even the very digital savvy millennial generation is less than 10% of the wealth distribution in the United States at this point, according to the Federal Reserve as of about a year. Gen Z's control of the economy is so low, it wasn't even noted by the Federal Reserve. So the reason you're all probably here is because you're not really sure where to start. What do you need to start a direct mail program? Your average piece is going to be broken up into 4 distinct parts. You need an outer envelope. This is going to be the first thing they say. This needs to be well designed and needs to jump out and grab whoever is holding this piece of mail. It is your very initial pitch. If you get to the point where they open it, then you need this main body piece. I would usually recommend keeping it simple, especially when you're starting out. Because there's always going to be some kinks in your system that you need to work out. So you probably don't want to put too heavy of a focus on design at first. This letter should be a pitch for your organization, and it should have a call to action. Something from like a letter from your editor is usually the way to go. You're also going to want a response slip. This is something that I will get into a little bit more in a bit. This is where the person is going to fill out their name. They're going to fill out how much they want to donate. They might include credit card information. They might include their email address. This is something that engages them just a little bit. You're also going to have a business reply envelope. This is a very important part of your mail piece. This makes it very easy for them to return you money. I'll get in a little bit more about how to set this up in a little bit. You're also going to ask, who do I need? It's probably going to take a few different people to put this together for you. There's graphic designer who's going to actually design your piece. You want it to be visually gripping, so you're going to want a professional to do this for you. This isn't something that you generally want to throw together on Canva. You're going to want a printer, generally some kind of expert in putting this together. The print and mail houses are not always combined. Sorry. Print and mail houses are usually combined in-house, but not always. This is something you're going to want to shop around a bit because prices are going to vary a lot. You're also going to want a data coordinator for all information from your database. You're going to want information like their address, their name, most recent contribution, etc. So you need somebody who's intimately familiar with this and can put together mailing segment. If you're looking to do an acquisition mailing, you're going to want to reach out to a list broker. Personally, I've worked with one called Mega, Mary E. Granger Associates. This list broker negotiates on your behalf with other organizations to get you good pricing and a list of names for you to do a cold call mail to.
Hey, Sean, I just wanted to jump in with a question that a couple folks asked in the question about your previous slide about the letter format as opposed to just a postcard. Is that something you would recommend folks try out or experiment with? Or
yes, I would suggest the letter rather than a postcard, specifically so you can include the business buy envelope. And so that you can use variable data on the ask string, which is something that I'll get to in a little bit. I know the term ask string is probably not familiar to everyone on this call, but it is a very important part of this piece. So you're going to need to contact your graphic designer. And you need to determine your messaging. What is the goal of your piece? Is it an acquisition where you're making your initial pitch? Are you coordinating it with your fundraising campaign? So do you want language referring to specific dates when people can get a donation match? Yeah. It's gonna, I'm sure a lot of people on this call are writers, so you can all get a little creative with your kind of pitch. And honestly, a lot of the language can be pretty similar to an email pitch. This point also comes back to why it's important to have somebody on your data team to pull clean data. Anyone who's worked with these databases before knows that, especially when you have online donors, you're going to get some weird names and addresses in your database. Every name and address that is spelled incorrectly, formatted incorrectly, etc., is one less person that you're going to reach. So you're going to want somebody to pull all this data from your database, go through it, and just make sure that everything is properly formatted in a consistent, clean way. You also want to determine who you're targeting. This comes back to, do you want to do a list rental, or do you want to target your currently existing donor base? Acquisitions are a little more complicated than mailing to in-house. So especially for your first mailing, you should probably start with your in-house list. I would only target people from the past few years for this. If you're an older organization, if you're newer, Spotlight is only about 5 years old. We tend to pull a whole donor base, but generally you probably shouldn't go back more than 3 years for that. You're going to want to shop around for these print mail houses. The prices can be very different depending on who you're working with, and not just pricing, but the quality of the service. Some shops could take weeks to get your product out the door. Others can do it in 3 days. So it's going to be very important that you get in contact with multiple print and mail houses. You're also going to want to contact your local post office for 2 reasons. One is to set up your business supply account, and the other is to set up your nonprofit mailing account. The nonprofits qualify for significantly lower postage rates, which can save you a ton of money. I believe first-class mail piece at the moment costs about 50 or 60 cents per piece versus a nonprofit rate, which is 20 cents. I would like to reiterate, you want a business supply account as well. These are very vital to an effective direct mail strategy because you make it very easy for your donor to send money to you. These are prepaid envelopes with your return address and a barcode that indicate what account the USPS is charging. You can have it debit you for every single individual piece, or you can have a prepaid account. All your donor has to do is put the check in the envelope and drop it in the mail, and it will be returned to whatever address you set up. You have to set this up with a local post office. Whichever post office is servicing your mailing address is who you're going to go into and find a representative to speak in person. It's actually fairly straightforward to do this. You can do it in one day. It's a one-page double-sided form. And they will help you on the spot even set up the design of your business supply envelope. You provide them with the logo, and they will put together everything else, which you just have to send to whatever printer prints your envelopes. This provides your donor with an incredibly easy way to get back to you, which is going to significantly boost your response rates. This is why I would recommend a letter over a postcard. Postcard, somebody has to go out and get an envelope, they have to get a stamp, or they have to navigate to your online site in order to make the donation. There are significantly more steps in that process and more places for them to hop and just reconsider even making the donation. You can utilize your nonprofit postage rates with a business supply envelope, it's easier to track the success of your mail campaign by putting, say, a simple code on your envelope to indicate which mail campaign this supply envelope is from. And people will also hold on to these envelopes. As I spoke to earlier, when you first reach out to somebody, they might not want to make that donation on the spot. They might want to track your organization for months or even years at a time. At the SPCA, there's a couple of times where we received donations from business supply envelopes that were dated 10 years earlier. You'd be really shocked at how long people hold on to them. And as long as they constantly see it, it's always in the back of their head to make this donation. And on top of that, sometimes a donor will attach a stamp to their envelope. If they do that, you can get a refund for that postage rate. This is an example of Spotlight's business supply. As you can see, it's very straightforward. Our logo is in the corner. Our mailing address is in the center. You have the permit number, which will be what is charged by the post office. And in the bottom left corner, there's a little code where we indicated which mail campaign this was from. I put DM 1123 as in direct mail in November 2023. This is the image that will be provided to you by the post office on the spot. As I said, you can just send it to the print house and they can just print from what is provided by the post office. Now we're going to get to the body, the main body.
Hey, Sean, before you get to that, there were a few questions about business reply. I think some folks messaged also that generally like what the cost is of doing the business reply, and is it worth it to encourage people to, hey, can you please put a stamp on this as part of your donation potential as a way to do it? So you think that the cost of business reply is worth it, I suppose?
Business reply is, I would say, absolutely vital to this. You could absolutely include some messaging in the body of the letter saying, yeah, we can get refunded for this. It's not something that I've ever actively solicited, so I don't know the effectiveness of that. I do see a question about QR code, and I will get to that in a little bit. But yeah, I really cannot stress enough how important the business reply is to boosting response rates. I think it's absolutely worth it. It adds very little cost to the actual mail piece itself. Setting up the account is very straightforward. And you can also use this business supply account for things besides direct mail. Every time we send a donor acknowledgement letter, we include a business supply envelope. Sometimes people will just immediately send in a second donation. If you have in-person events, you can hand them off and they could just decide down the line to make a donation. This is a very effective way to solicit donations. The letter. Purpose of the letter should be to refamiliarize these people with your organization or familiarize them the first time. Even if it's somebody who already reads your work, you still need to make your pitch in the same way that you would for an email solicitation. You should include examples of actual impact, laws that were passed, people that got freed from jail because of your reporting, things like that. You want to make it clear that their money is having an effect on their community. You want to include a call to action. It's important to actually request the donation. This is not just a touch point where you're just informing people that you still exist. You should let them know that it does cost money to run your organization and you do rely on philanthropy to keep you going. That's something that you can add, touch points. You know, how much does it cost for you to pull a records request? How much does it cost to pay the salary of your employee? What is something that what is the difference somebody can make to your organization through their single donation? Another touch point that I mentioned is variable language. You can use data from your database to target people specifically. If they're in a certain geographic location, you can have it variable language referencing that geographic location from a county or their city or what have you. Everything from a single line to a whole paragraph. I'm going to pull up a few examples of letters that Spotlight has sent out. This was our initial mailing at Spotlight. We use this for both our first direct mail piece and our acquisition. As you can see, we have our name, our URL, we have our values, we have mission statements, we have a whole pitch across this whole first page, and then on the second page, a further pitch, a whole letter from our CEO and President, Chris Baxter. We designed this one so that way it could be used both for our in-house list and our acquisitions. It works both as a reminder of the impact that we have on our community and an introduction to the organization as a whole. We also included this pledge card. This was, for this one, we did a separate card, also inserted into the envelope. As you can see here, there is an ask string. That's something I touched on briefly before, but this is a very important aspect of your mail. Generally, your ask string should be based on the most, or an in-house list should be based on the most recent contribution of your donor. The reason for that is that these numbers act as an anchor point to determine how much they're going to give. You both refamiliarize themselves with the previous level of contribution they were willing to give, and you give them just a data point to work off. Generally, what you want to do is have the first number be the most recent contribution, and the rest be multipliers. The numbers on this one were just samples. These are not reflective of real life data. I would not recommend doing a 10 times ask for the final amount. But you should generally do something like the first one is the most recent contribution, then maybe 1.5 times, 2 times, 2.5 times, all for the first, say, $500. We also include the option for them to donate via credit card. Just fill out more information, which they've done, and mail back, and we fill out for them. You're not going to see responses from this very often, and I would even consider this pretty optional. Most people are just going to mail you a check, but it doesn't hurt to have there. We solicit information like email address if we don't already have it. We provide them our mailing address in case they decide not to use our VRE. And we include a QR code that they can scan. This brings them to our donate page, and it's one that we can use to track. It provides our payment processor with the information about which mail piece it was that was sent. This is the third mail piece that we sent. This was an end of year one. It's black and white. It's a little more simple. This is mailed only to our in-house members. We went with a letter from the editor. Very simple, very straightforward. It was one-sided, black and white, and believe it or not, it actually was more successful than the more in-depth two-sided full color piece. So a complicated piece is not always necessarily the way you want to go, and you can even save yourself some money by going simple. The third piece, which I don't have results from yet because it just hit homes yesterday, is this. We mailed a member card. This member card had variable data. This is obviously placeholder text, but this indicates their name and when they made their first donation. This is something that we use to great success with SBCA. People love seeing that data. They love seeing how long they've been a member, etc. Then with that, we had the body, which was just a letter with impact, touch points, and again, signed by our CEO and president.
Can I ask a question, Sean?
Sure.
So was the full color piece that wasn't as effective as the black and white one, was that one sent to prospects and not already in-house donors?
The black and white piece was sent only to in-house. We've only done one acquisition at Spotlight.
I was just trying to figure out why the black and white one performed better.
Honestly, it can be a roll of the dice. It could be both that they realize these pieces are going to keep coming. Then there's also some people just prefer for every penny to go to the mission, where they don't necessarily need the fancy pitch. We also included specific impact points from throughout 2023. Bring that letter back up. We made the pitch about how many newspapers per week the country's losing. We talked about our impact on the community, et cetera, et cetera. We also, instead of having a separate response slip, had a detachable one at the bottom, which I'll get to a little bit more there later. It's not always predictable which one is going to do better. You could always do some kind of AP testing, do one color, one black and white, and just test for yourself. Split your mailing list down the middle. It might depend a lot on your audience. Then we get to the response slip. This is what is going to make them take a more active role in your donation. I spoke to this a little bit earlier. These ask strings are very important. They act as an anchor point. They remind them how much they're previously willing to give. And they also give a soft encouragement for somebody to donate further. For lower level donations, I would do something like high multipliers. Somebody who gave $10 maybe ask for 10, 20, 30, 40. Somebody who gave 100, maybe 100, 120, 150, 200, things like that. You should generally reduce the multiplier the higher the most recent contribution. Eventually, you might even want to stop using multipliers at all if you choose to send this to higher level donors, 1,000 plus. You should include some spaces where they can indicate whether they want additional touch points from you, whether it be newsletters, information about planned giving, if they want personal outreach from a major gift officer, if they're interested in events, things like that. At Spotlight, we've both done a separate piece and a tearaway as the main body. The tearaway was what we used on the black and white piece. As I said, that one was actually like slightly more successful. And I find that to be like a little bit easier rather than having to dig through the envelope, they just kind of rip it off. This is the response slip that we had in the black and white piece. We have a call to action saying, yes, I want to support independent journalism in Pennsylvania. We have an ask string. We have the option for them to request more information, credit card number, or even just scan the QR code to make the additional donation. Then you have to ask, who am I sending this to? Is it a list of your current donors? Is it people who are subscribers but not yet donors? Or is it potential donors that you're acquiring from an outside organization? First, we're going to speak about in-house lists. These are people that are already familiar with your organization. They either donate to you, they follow your email newsletters, they've been to your events. They know who you are, so there's less of a pitch there. For an older organization, I'd say like 5+ years, I would only target donors past 3 months. After about 2 years, you're probably going to see a pretty significant drop off in the number of responses that you're going to get. So it's really better to tighten up the focus, specifically because every additional person you send a piece of mail to is going to cost you more money. So it's less likely that you're actually going to profit this if you try to mail to, say, everyone who's donated over the past decade. Spotlight is a bit of a newer organization, only founded in 2019. So we have mailed to our whole list, but even then it's only a couple thousand people. You can consider segmenting your list by demographic information, such as their location. This is something I've used to great effect at the Pennsylvania SPCA. It can be in the body of the letter or on the response slip. Something that we did at the SPCA was if we sent to donors to our Lancaster Center, we just had a piece of variable messaging that said, instead of would you like to make a donation to the Pennsylvania SPCA, it was would you like to make a donation to the Lancaster Center at the Pennsylvania SPCA. It makes things a little more personal, makes things a little more targeted, and that's going to increase the chances that they actually make this donation. Something that we have not experimented with yet, but are in the process of doing at Spotlight, is reaching out to a list append service that is finding address data for people who follow our newsletter but haven't made a donation yet. The number of people that you're going to get addresses for is going to be a little hit and miss. I wouldn't expect to get everybody in your whole newsletter list, but this is going to be an easier sell than an outside acquisition list. They already like your work. They already read you regularly. Chances are they're going to be much more willing to make the contribution for these reasons.
Hey, Sean, before you go on, I have a quick question about the ask strings. It's a question from Kristen in the chat. And so when you say you have the lowest amount be the most recent donation and then ask higher of that, is each letter mail merged specifically, or how are you approaching that?
Yes. So generally, I'll just have extra columns in whatever spreadsheet does the mail is being used for the mail merge. I'll use a Excel formula, which just whatever column times 1, then another times 0.2. So you can just do it yourself in-house to put those together. I would round them to like the nearest 5 or 10 or what have you. But yes, generally this is going to be information on your spreadsheet, which will be used for the mail merge. Variable data tends to cost more money when it comes to the printer, but it does help a lot. Specifically because you're not going to be leaving money on the table. If you ask somebody for $10, they're probably going to give $10. But they might have the giving potential to give you 100, because that might have been their last gift. But they're going to think that you only need $10 if that's what you're asking, which is why it's really important to have that anchor point of what their most recent contribution was. I should note that for the ask strings are really only going to be targeted to people in-house where you have the donor data. You can just use a more static ask string for something like acquisitions. I would actually suggest using much lower ask amounts for acquisitions because it's much less of a barrier to entry for them. If you're asking for $100 off of that, they're probably going to say no. Acquisition lists tend to be very important, I find, because there's always going to be a natural attrition rate. Spotlights is about, we retain people about 70% year over year, but that means that we're losing 30% of our donors year over year as well. To have financial stability, they need to be replaced by additional donors. One of the best ways to do this is to get donors from other organizations. These are people already predisposed to give to charitable organizations, and chances are they give to similar organizations. You can work with a list broker who will get you, say, a list of 5, 10, 15 organizations where you can rent segments from each of them. Nonprofit organizations like NPR, League of Women Voters, Common Cause, etc., will often rent these lists out. Even political campaigns, the DNC will do it. Local politicians will do it. Generally the cost is variable. It can be as low as, say, $500 for a few thousand names, or it could be as high as $1,500. That's going to vary greatly depending on the organization and the rates that your broker can get for you. You're going to be targeting people who already donate. You expand your brand awareness. You're generally going to get, through an acquisition, probably a 1% response rate. So if you're mailing 10,000 people, you'll probably get about 100 people actually donating. But a less direct benefit to it is that leaves 9,900 people who've now, at the very least, heard your name. They are more familiar with the organization and they've heard your pitch. They might even go, even if they don't donate, they might go to your website and start reading your news. You can also use your current donor base and reader base in order to inform what organizations you're renting from. If you're sending out reader surveys, and one question that you can add is something simple as, what other organizations do you contribute to? What types of organizations? Are they given to animal welfare? Are they given to women's rights groups? Are they given to gay rights groups? Things of that nature. As I spoke to before, the response rates are going to be a lot lower than I wouldn't expect more than 1% of people you solicit to get back to you. 10,000 recipients got spotlighted about 100 brand new donors for the first time. A rental of 5,000 names can be between $500 and $1,500. So it's not necessarily very cheap, but it ends up working out in the end. An important note is that you probably should not expect to profit on that initial mailing. You're probably going to operate at least a slight loss. But if you calculate the lifetime donor value, chances are over time, it's going to be a pretty significant profit. Because most people are not going to make a single donation. If they give one, they'll give three, they'll give four, etc. One thing to note is that when you do rent from other organizations, they're going to want some information about your acquisition. They're generally going to want to see what you're actually sending, and they're going to want to know when. Specifically, they want to make sure that you're not sending something offensive to their donors, and they want to make sure that it's not going to conflict with their own fundraising campaigns. For this reason, acquisition tends to be a much time-consuming process than in-house. So you just want to build in a few extra weeks than you would. It's just going to take longer out the door. And
Sean, quick question about acquisition from Jennifer in the comments. Can you use public political donation databases? My understanding is that the laws around this have changed relatively recently, but wanted to ask you also.
This is something I'm not super sure about. I don't believe you can use the federal voter rolls. This is something you should check with your Secretary of State of your locality. They should be able to give you that answer. I'm under the impression that some states allow you to use those voter rolls specifically for election-related solicitations, but I am not confident about that whatsoever. So definitely check with your local Secretary of State for the laws surrounding. It's not something I've done before, and I really can't speak to it, especially because I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an expert on that kind of election law. I think it's worth looking into. So our spotlights test, we mail them to 10,000 donors. This is broken up between, it's about 5,000 people from NPR. And then League of Women Voters and Common Cause made up about the other 5,000. Last I checked, we got 113 brand new households to us for the first time. And I calculated the average gift amount to be just under $50. I previously calculated our lifetime donor value based on 2023 data, which came out to $544, was the average amount that a donor would give before dropping off and hitting that attrition point. That means that although our initial mailing operates at a slight loss, that's over $60,000 in additional revenue that we'll get over the next 3.5 years. If we had not, that's more than 62,000 more than we would have gotten if we had not mailed to them. So here we are at the end. My final pitch is just direct mail, although it may be a little harder to pitch in a more digital age, is something that makes it really easy to get your messaging in people's hands. It can generate a surprising amount of revenue, and it targets the philanthropic population that still holds the greatest amount of wealth in the United States. It's not as easy to set up. It's going to take some time. It's going to take troubleshooting, and it's going to take some hard work to set up. But once that initial work is out of the way, it actually gets pretty easy, and you can kind of start pumping these things out. And at the end of the day, it tends to be a very worthwhile fundraising channel. I'm under the impression that it's not very common in nonprofit news yet, but any successful nonprofit is probably utilizing direct mail in some capacity. If anybody has any further questions about this, that they think about a later date, you can reach out to me at s.o'riordan@spotlightpa.org. Is there any further questions from anybody in the audience? Maybe something I didn't cover?
Amazing, Sean. This was outstanding. Thank you so much. I have a few questions that people were putting in the chat that we didn't get to, but we're here till the top of the hour. So if folks have other questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or the Q&A or raise your hand. The first one that came up a bit, but Mary worded this particularly well, but could you give some ballpark cost range on campaign size, budget, and outcomes as well? You know, you talked a little bit about the cost of acquisition for when you're acquiring lists, but the costs that go into in-house lists as well versus what you get out of it and the amount raised, I suppose.
So the reason that it's a little difficult to give the answer to that is because the prices are run very wildly depending on which print house you go with. Spotlights has been a little bit more expensive. We worked with an external designer, so we got charged for the actual design of the pieces themselves. And our print and mail house was a little more expensive. So I believe that we came out to costs of to mail to approaching 3,000 people, came out to about $5 or $6 grand per piece for the in-house lists. And I believe we brought in 9,000-ish in revenue so far, so a few $1,000s in profit per piece, which doesn't sound that extreme, but this is only 2 pieces. And at the end of the day, it's another touch point for which you can communicate with your audience and really focus them in on your mission and just remind them that you're out there. It's going to scale a lot depending on how many people you're mailing to. If you're mailing to 30,000 people, it's going to be significantly cheaper per person. And like I said, our print house was a little bit more on the expensive side. You could probably get that down by a few grand if you really shop around.
Awesome. I imagine like costs for design work and that type of stuff also can be done in-house versus having to pay a freelancer that could.
Yeah, exactly. If you have an in-house graphic designer, that's probably going to cut at least $1 grand cost.
Terrific. One of the other questions we got a couple asked about, which I know your background is in nonprofits, but do you think that these tactics could be applicable to for-profit newsrooms and news organizations as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, a lot of the same statistics apply. It's the people with the disposable income still skew older, and older, the more people that skew older, the more comfortable they're going to be interacting with the mail in this way. It's what they grew up on. I'd say it's probably going to cost a little bit more because you don't get to utilize those nonprofit mail rates, but otherwise the underlying principles are going to be pretty much the same.
Terrific. Question about getting names from NPR. Is that from NPR, the network, or from member stations? How did you go about working with NPR on that, I suppose?
So that was the national NPR, but we focused it to only donors that were located in Pennsylvania. I believe it was their donors that had given within the past 24 months, like $5 and above. One of the benefits of working with a list broker is you don't actually have to deal with the organizations yourself. We had a sales rep at this broker that reached out to a number of organizations, got pricing, got numbers of how many people were available in the geographic area we were targeting. They told us what kind of segmentation that they'd be providing us, et cetera. And then you just put in your order and they send you a spreadsheet.
Amazing. We've had a couple questions also about privacy and privacy concerns on a couple ends of that. First of all, if people are mailing you their credit card information, is that something you're concerned about in terms of making sure that that doesn't get compromised? And then also, on the other end, does Spotlight have a donor privacy or gift acceptance policy? Are you then also selling your mailing list back through brokers to other folks as well?
In regards to the credit card, there's always obviously the concern because unfortunately mail theft is a thing, which is one of the reasons why not many people want to send you your credit card information. And I would consider that as like a very optional part to include on your reply slip. I would just say make sure that somebody trustworthy checking your mail, and you should destroy the slip, or at the very least redact the slip that has that information on it after the gift is processed. As far as renting lists out, Spotlight has not done that yet. It's something where some organizations won't rent to you unless you're also willing to share your list. Most don't care. You can rent yours out for an extra revenue stream, but it's something where you would want to inform the donors that that's possible, that you want to share their information. And it's not always something I would recommend, for the reason that that might make your donor feel, put off. They might not want to donate to you for that reason. And if you do decide to go that avenue, should provide a way for people to opt out of that.
Awesome. Thank you. For the in-house approach, one of the questions we got was, have you seen this be an effective way to re-engage lapsed donors? And do you see that folks who've already given online or are already members, how have they responded to getting additional solicitations in the mail?
Yeah, it can be an effective way to re-engage with lapsed. There's a lot of people who hadn't donated in years that have given again. I would say that you probably shouldn't target lapsed that often. Maybe once or twice a year. Extend how far back you're going from 3 years to say 5 or 6. But the reason I say you shouldn't do it that often is because A, they're not going to want to get bugged that often, and B, because they're also more likely to take a loss on that because it costs money per person to reach out to. I would, if you're trying to re-engage lapsed donors, I would have probably not a variable ask string, lower it to make that request a little lighter, ask for $5 to $10 for that initial ask, and maybe have some variable messaging saying, we miss you, something along those lines.
Awesome, thank you. I can keep asking questions all day, but if other people want to jump in live, please feel free to raise your hand, and welcome to come off mute or jump in with your questions. Wanted to feel like a conversation and not just us talking at you. But another question we got in the chat a couple times was around testing. And are you guys doing A/B testing, or are you thinking about how to test messaging or donation amounts? But I'm curious how you're thinking about testing.
We haven't tried A/B testing yet. We've only sent out a couple of these pieces in the first place, but I would almost consider our first and second in-house mailing to be sort of an A/B. We did the one intricate, full color, 2-page piece, and then we did a black and white, simple piece. I wouldn't say that the differences in the revenue were significant enough to really make a true determination of which is better there. But that was the closest that we got to A/B testing.
Awesome. And here's a question that a couple folks were interested also in the chat. Can you speak more about the service you mentioned that is trying to find the addresses from your newsletter email list? What data did you provide them, and who was the vendor?
Believe the vendor was named something like Blue Lena. That wasn't really my project per se. We provide them email addresses and names that we had, and then they tried to match them to actual physical mailing addresses.
Could you say that name again?
I believe it was Blue Lena, Lena, but I'm not 100% positive about that. That wasn't my project personally.
Sean, I can speak to that for a second. Basically, the process is you guys had 33,000 email contacts that did not have a physical address associated with them, and we use a service called it's called reverse address append. And what that does is it will actually append name and physical address along with some demographic and lifestyle characteristics. So it's essentially a form of wealth screening. Most of the wealth screening services, I think, that publishers are using only works where you already have a physical address. So what this does, it allows you to increase the addressable market by taking just an email contact and adding the address. So I think we got a 70% match rate on those 33,000. So it was something like 26,000 contacts that up to that point were just email only now have a physical address. And so that That's how that works.
And Daniel, do you want to introduce yourself also for folks who don't know
Sure.
you?
Daniel from Blue Lena.
Um,
Thanks,
so
man.
yeah, Daniel was helped work on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. One other question that we had come up a couple times also is there's best practices, it sound like, that are best practices for fundraising and nonprofits in general. Sean, from your experience with Spotlight, do you see anything that is particular to news or journalism that resonates in particular, or is it just generally like these are the best practices and it'll work regardless if you're fundraising for animal care or journalism or a food bank, no matter what you're trying to do?
I think people want to see impact in their community. They want to, it's harder to find a specific example of what their dollar is going to do for them than something like, say, animal welfare. Just like I said, you can put a picture of a sick puppy on your cover and it's immediately obvious where your money is going for. And journalism's a little more abstract. So I think it's very important to include what has your news organization specifically managed to accomplish for their community, and just what is their dollars going to do to besides just allow you to continue to exist.
Awesome, thank you. One other question in the Q&A from Philip Smith, which is a much more tactical one in terms of how many mailings can or would you possibly send to an acquired list?
So from an acquisition list, so you're actually, when you're renting these lists, you're generally going to agree to just do the one mailing. There is a distinction between buying the list and renting. If it's buying, you can add them to your database and you have free use of them. Most places are going to do a rental where they have to agree about what package you're sending, when you're sending it, and how many times you're sending it. They might agree to just allow you to do it more than once, but they're still going to need to know general timelines now.
Awesome. Any final questions? I think we're getting back to the top of the hour. So if anyone else wants to jump in with any final questions, comments, we'll give you space to do that. But if not, oh, Jenny, go ahead. Nope, you're muted.
My question's for Daniel. Can you tell me about how much it costs to convert these emails? That's been one of my biggest issues, is that I did not collect mailing address when I first started with my CRM system, and I really wish I had.
Sure. I can confirm this. I believe the cost is it's $125,000, excuse me, $125 per 1,000 records, and that only applies to those where there's a successful match.
Okay, and you use Blue Lena, is that correct?
That's our company, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so you are Blue Lena. Okay,
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sure.
Quick question. Sean, when you have the QR code on the response device, does it take them to a donate page that matches the ask string that you've included on the remittance device?
No, I don't currently know of a good way to really set up a customized ask string like that. That's probably going to be more of a generic one, but I would say in our experience, most people are still not even utilizing the QR code. The vast majority of those donations, people are just sending in checks.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Terrific. Well, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you especially to Sean for this hugely practical and really action-oriented session. I know I learned a ton, so I hope everyone else did. We will follow up with the recording, with slides, with the links we shared in the chat and some notes as well. So be on the lookout for that in the next couple days. And we'll be here for the next few minutes if anyone else wants to chat. But thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for being a part of this community. And we will follow up also about some upcoming events that we're scheduling for April and into the spring. So much more to come to help with fundraising work. So Thank you, everyone, for being here.